Traps and pots are submerged three-dimensional wire or wood devices that permit organisms to enter the enclosure but make escape extremely difficult or impossible. Traps and pots are submerged three-dimensional wire or wood devices that permit organisms to enter the enclosure but make escape extremely difficult or impossible. Bait is commonly secured in the trap to lure organisms inside, where they wait until fishermen return to retrieve the catch and rebait the traps. Most traps are attached by a rope to a buoy on the surface of the water. Traps can be set individually or in a long continuous series, called trawls, at depths up to 2,400 feet, 730 meters. Gear size, configuration, and hazards to protected species differ depending on target species. The vertical lines running from the trap to the surface buoy can entangle sea turtles, particularly leatherback turtles, around the flippers, neck, or carapace. If traps are heavily weighted, turtles can drown because they cannot reach the surface to breathe. Some fishermen attribute broken or disfigured pots and traps to sea turtles that have attempted to eat the bait or catch inside. However, these depredation attempts do not commonly lead to injury or entrapment. The lines connecting traps to each other, ground lines, or to the surface buoy, vertical lines, can entangle marine mammals. Large or small cetaceans can become entangled around their bodies and fins, leaving lacerations that can lead to infection. Large whales, including endangered North Atlantic right whales, humpback whales, fin whales, and grey whales, are particularly susceptible to becoming entangled in trap or pot gear due to spatial overlap with fisheries and their feeding behavior. The effects of entanglement can range from no permanent injury to serious injury and death. If the traps are weighted down, entangled whales and dolphins can drown if they cannot reach the surface to breathe. Culling rings may be added to a section of a trap or pot to allow undersized animals to escape, but this approach does not minimize injury to marine mammals or turtles. Weak links and breakaway lines are fishing gear modifications that can minimize injury and mortality by allowing the animal to break free from the gear and reach the surface to swim away with minimal trailing lines. The use of sinking ground lines between traps instead of floating ground lines that arc up into the water column also minimizes the risk of entanglement. Reducing the number of buoy lines in the water column by trawling up, or adding more traps per trawl, should reduce risks to protected species. However, the level of risk reduction cannot be quantified because the current number of vertical lines is unknown. Reducing the number of vertical lines will likely directly improve the entanglement risk presented by vertical buoy lines. With the growing grey seal population in the Baltic Sea, the inshore cod fishery has suffered dramatic increases in both catch losses and damage to fishing gear. To mitigate this situation, cod pots were evaluated as an alternative to traditional gill nets and long lines. During a 3-year study, cod pots were used by commercial fishers in 2 areas off the coast of Sweden. Using the data from this study, we evaluated catches from pots in relation to other gear types and investigated the effects of environmental and fisheries-related variables such as depth and soak time. The comparison of pots with other gear types showed that, during the first half of the year, the pot fishery generated lower daily catches than the gill net and longline fisheries at comparable fishing efforts. During the second half of the year, catches in the pot fishery exceeded or were equal to those in the traditional fisheries. Using generalized additive models to evaluate the impact of environmental and fisheries-related variables on pot catches, we showed that, in both areas, the catch per unit effort (CPUE) of legal-sized cod was affected by the water depth, the time of year, months, and the soak time. In one of the areas, CPUE was also affected by the direction of the water current in relation to the orientation of the string of pots. The CPUE of undersized cod was affected by topographic variables such as the slope and the complexity of the bottom, in addition to the water depth, month of the year, and soak time. The results from the study indicate that pots can be a useful alternative gear in the Baltic cod fishery, at least during part of the year. By using our information on how catches are affected by environmental and fisheries-related variables, the pot fishery may be further optimized to increase catches. Catch per unit effort, catching efficiency, cod pot, environmental and fisheries-related effects, GAM, gillnet and longline fisheries. Seal-inflicted damage to fishing gear and catch losses have increased rapidly along the coast of the Baltic Sea, and many small-scale coastal fisheries have been severely affected. Westerberg et al. 2006, Brookmeyer and Hodge Larson, 2008, Hemmingson et al. 2008. The gillnet and longline fisheries for Atlantic cod, Gardus morhua, have experienced extensive surges in damage caused by grey seals, Halichoerus grippus, since around the year 2000, Knigson et al. 2009. This has led to the development of seal-safe alternative fishing gear, such as baited cod pots. Cod pots are preferable to traditional methods in areas prone to seal predation, as they enclose the caught fish in a compartment which can be made seal-safe, meaning that it is much harder for the seals to get at the fish than when they are caught in a gill net or hooked on a line. Knigson, 2011. Ovigard et al. 2011. The environmental impact of traps and pots is also considered less severe than that of trawls and other active fishing gear. Jennings et al. 2001, Thompson et al. 2010. Pots are classified as life, low-impact and fuel-efficient fishing gear due to their low energy use, effective species selectivity, and low gear construction costs. Sueronen et al. 2012. At the time of writing, there is no production of commercial cod pots that meet the criteria of being practical to handle, seal-safe, and effective. Fishing gear manufacturers are in the process of further developing cod pots in collaboration with fisheries scientists. However, more knowledge of what affects the pot's catching efficiency is needed to optimize the pots. Catch levels in baited fishing gear such as cod pots are affected by two main factors: the fish density around the gear and the catching efficiency of the gear. Engis and Lockerborg, 1994, Araguin Sanchez, 1996. Fish distribution, that is fish density around the gear, varies due to factors such as prey and predator abundance, overall environmental conditions, and migratory behavior. RO, 1989. The large-scale distribution of cod in the Baltic Sea is determined by hydrographic factors such as oxygen concentration and salinity, along with density-dependent factors such as the size of the cod population in relation to its spatial distribution. Tian et al. In preparation. At smaller spatial scales, factors such as seabed topography and bottom currents also influence fish distribution. Bergstrom et al. 2011. The catching efficiency of the gear is affected by environmental variables influencing fish activity, feeding motivation, and the ability of the fish to detect, locate, and consume the bait. These variables could include light levels, currents, temperature, density, size distribution of competitors, and the abundance of natural prey. The pot's catching efficiency is also related to the active space of the fish pots, which includes the area over which feeding attractants from the bait are present in concentrations above the response threshold of the fish. This active space is determined by the release rate and transport of chemical cues through the water, as well as the chemosensory threshold for an individual fish at a specific time. These components are, in turn, dependent on several of the above-mentioned environmental variables. Additionally, it is only a proportion of the fish in the active space that respond to bait or can be lured into the pot and be caught. One aim of the present study was to evaluate environmental and fisheries-related variables affecting the catch in a pot fishery for cod in the Baltic Sea. In addition, we extrapolated catches to correspond to the effort that would be used in a commercial fishery, and compared these with catches from other commercial gear types in the same area. By simultaneously evaluating the influence of both fisheries-related and environmental variables, the relative effects of these factors can be separated, thereby aiding an understanding of factors determining the catching efficiency of the pot fisheries. Map of the cod pot fishing areas in the Hanno Bight. One dot on the map is the position of a string set during one fishing trip. The dots on the left side of the map are included in Area 1 and the dots on the upper right are included in Area 2. Figure 1. Map of the cod pot fishing areas in the Hanno Bight. One dot on the map is the position of a string set during one fishing trip. The dots on the left side of the map are included in Area 1 and the dots on the upper right are included in Area 2. Open in New tab, download slide. The floating pot with one entrance facing downstream. Length, 150 cm, width, 100 cm, and height, 120 cm. The pot is made of a material with a square mesh with the length of the mesh side 27 mm and black 1.5 mm polyethylene twine. Figure 2. The floating pot with one entrance facing downstream. Length, 150 cm, width, 100 cm, and height, 120 cm. The pot is made of a material with a square mesh with the length of the mesh side 27 mm and black 1.5 mm polyethylene twine. Open in New tab, download slide. Pots were baited with 250 grams of fresh chopped herring, Cluppy haringus, and were deployed in sets, with 2 to 8 pots along the same connecting bottom line, defined as one string. Pots were attached to the bottom line at a spacing of 50 meters between pots, meaning that string lengths varied between 100 and 400 meters. Fishers in Area 1 deployed up to 12 strings, with 4 to 8 pots in each string. In Area 2, the fisher set up to 4 strings, with 2 to 8 pots in each string. Soak time varied between 1 to 14d in Area 1 and 1 to 12d in Area 2. Soak time was dependent on weather conditions and the fishers' logistics. The fishers noted the position of the fishing location, the soak time, and the date and time of emptying the pots and the catch size, weight and number, for each pot. Cod catches were divided into 2 size classes. Cod less than 38 cm in length and cod 38 cm or longer, the minimum legal landing size for Baltic cod, and in certain strings the length of each fish was measured. Fish under 38 cm were returned to the sea. On a large number of fishing trips in Area 1, observers joined the fishers on their daily fishing trips. In Area 2, observers were only occasionally on board, although regular contact was still maintained to quality check the data. During the experimental period, some pots were modified and tested for increased fishing efficiency, for example, either by affixing lights to the pots to attract fish, or by fitting escape panels for studying size selectivity. These pots were excluded from the analyses of environmental and fisheries-related effects on pot catches, because the modifications might have affected the catch levels. However, when comparing pot catches with gillnet and longline catches, data from pots with modifications which gave an equal or higher catching efficiency were included. Pots were excluded from the dataset when they had torn meshes or were twisted around the bottom line. From March 2010, all pots were fitted with an escape panel, with square meshes with the length of the mesh side 45 mm, on one side of the pot, replacing the ordinary mesh panel with a mesh side of 27 mm, to reduce the catch of undersized cod. Ovigard et al. 2011 found that a 45 mm square mesh panel significantly reduces the catch of cod smaller than 38 cm. That study, the estimated length at 50% retention was modeled, using the select method, and thereby found to be 38 cm when escape panels were used. However, looking at the actual counted data presented in the article, comparison of cod lengths between pots with escape panels and without escape panels indicated that all cod greater than 38 cm were retained in the pots. In this study, we have assumed that cod is greater than or equal to 38 cm was retained in pots equipped with an escape panel. The length distribution of the fish caught, in pots without an escape panel, shows that only 3% of the cod are 38 cm. Therefore, considering the small number of cod with this length caught in pots with escape panels and the 50% retention probability at 38 cm, it is unlikely that the assumption mentioned above will affect the results. The mean weight of cod in kilogram per pot for each month was calculated for February 2009 until December 2009 for the test fishing conducted in Area 1. Only cod with a length of 38 cm or more were included in the analysis. Data from this area and year were chosen due to the fact that in this area the test fishing was more extensive, using more strings of pots than in the other area where data were available. Moreover, in 2010, the catches from the entire cod fishery in the Hanno Bight, including the gillnet and longline fisheries, decreased dramatically, and a large proportion of the cod in this area were found to be in an unusually poor condition, for as yet unknown reasons. For this reason, only the 2009 trials were included in the comparison between catch rates in the pot fishery and the gillnet and longline fisheries. In the inshore Baltic cod fishery, both gillnets and longlines are used, often by the same fishers who alternate the two different fishing methods. Therefore, to get an estimate of the total daily catches in the combined fishery, gillnet and longline catches have been merged. The mean WPUE per month from the cod pot trials was used to calculate the potential catches per day and per month in a full-scale commercial fishery, assuming one fishing boat would haul 120 pots per day. That assumption is based on the fact that during the trials the fishers were able to haul up to 96 pots in a day, at the same time as counting and weighing every fish and keeping detailed protocols as regards position, effort, and time. Data on catches from gillnet and longline fisheries conducted in the same area as the pot fishery were extracted from the official EU logbook. All licensed commercial fishers in Sweden are required to keep records and report their catches in accordance with the EU official logbook system and national requirements. For fishing vessels with a length of 8 meters or more, cod catches must be reported daily, together with information on gillnet type, length, and location of gillnets. Only active fishing vessels catching greater than 10 tons of cod per year were included in the analysis. The 25 boats concerned represented 56% of all licensed fishing vessels operating in the Hanno area. The mean catch per fishing day and fishing vessel were calculated and compared with the pot fishery data. Generalized additive models were applied to explain the variability in catches of cod. For these analyses, a suite of data of potential explanatory variables, predictors, was gathered. Both environmental predictors linked with cod habitat use and predictors related to the fishery were used. Environmental variables included in the analyses were water depth, seabed slope, and seabed complexity, together with bottom current velocity and the angle between the bottom current and the line of orientation of the string of pots. The bathymetric raster was constructed from point measurements obtained from the S. While trot lining for crabs is generally considered the most efficient method of harvesting a bushel basket full of cranky crustaceans, running a trot line also requires a certain amount of skill and a whole lot of work. The baiting process alone can take an hour. Debating the line is almost as tedious, and showering yourself with chicken neck juices during the experience is not exactly delightful. Still, if there's any one activity worth missing a few hours of fishing for, it's crabbing. Those southerners can have their shrimp and those northerners are welcome to their lobster, because in Chesapeake country there's simple nothing we love more than sitting down to a pile of jimmies steamed over beer and vinegar and loaded up with Old Bay. If you're shaking your head, no, we officially banish you to North Dakota. Pull traps, as opposed to trot lines, are quite easy to bait and operate, and require much less of a time investment. To get some trap pulling insight, we spoke with Jim Beeler of Marty's Bait and Tackle, who uses pull traps in addition to trot lines himself. I use traps early in the season and late in the season, he explains, when you don't really know just where the crabs will be and you do know you'll have to search a bit. You can set a few in each different depth range, and as you catch a crab here or there, shift all the others into the productive area. With a trot line, you'd have to pull the whole thing in to reposition it. But a lot of people use traps all the time, regardless of the season, simply because they're easy to use. You can buy a batch of traps and catch a batch of crabs all in the same day, without a whole lot of learning or preparation. Once the season is in full swing, it's usually best to concentrate between 5 and 7 feet of water. Still, however, savvy crab trappers will set a few test traps in different depths just to be sure. Weather and tide can sometimes drive the crabs to congregate in depths that you hadn't necessarily expected. Also look for cuts and creek mouths, which crabs tend to congregate near, and place your traps outside of them. Underwater humps and bars can be very productive as well. Jim says that when gearing up you should consider using topless traps, because they can be stacked for much easier storage and won't take up nearly as much room on the boat. He suggests using a bungee cord to secure the traps in each stack together. Don't worry about the crabs swimming out, he says. They swim sideways and down when they're scared, and as long as you give a quick pull at the start to close the trap's doors, then pull in the line briskly, they almost never swim out the top. What about hoop traps, which have a pair of rings combined with cotton netting? While they work on the same principle and can be effective, Jim notes that in his experience, they deteriorate rather quickly. Plus, if an angry crab clamps a claw around the netting, it can be tough to get the feisty critter out without causing damage. Topless pull traps, on the other hand, will last for years on end. All other factors aside, perhaps the best thing about using pull traps as opposed to running a trot line is that your kids can get involved. They won't merely be riding along, as might happen when trot lining, but can play an active role by pulling in the traps. Even 4 or 5-year-olds can pull up a line, though you'll probably want to grab the float and make the initial tug, and they'll be thrilled beyond words each and every time a trap breaks the surface with a crab scuttling around in the bottom. That'll give them a serious sense of accomplishment, and it'll give the entire family the best meal on the face of the planet. It's 2 big unpinched thumbs up for Jake Fleischert, showing off a full bushel basket of TR Avon success. Photo courtesy of Jeff Fleischert. Depending on the current, one side or the other of a point may be significantly more productive at any given time. When in search mode, it's always a good idea to set half your traps on one side of a point and the others on the opposite side. After a few rotations pulling all the traps up, you should know which side to then focus all your effort on. Rig about 12 feet of line to each trap. It's rare you'll want to crab in water deeper than 10 feet, and when crabbing in shallower water, you can always leave some of the line wrapped around the float. Stick with chicken necks for bait. They're easy to secure in place, last a long time, and the crabs love them. Don't give the traps a ton of soak time. Pulling each one only takes it out of action for a moment, and if a crab is in there while you wait, it'll just tear up the bait.